Today on Radical Personal Finance, it's live Q&A. Oops, forgot to unmute myself. Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I am your host. Today is Friday, January 17, 2025. Brand new year still, and today in this new year, on this Friday, live Q&A. I want to welcome all of you to Radical Personal Finance. Welcome to the many new listeners who are tuning in these days. I really appreciate it. If you are new to a Friday Q&A show, you can... It works just like call-in talk radio. You call in, we visit, we talk about anything that is on your mind, anything that you want to talk about. Works kind of like Open Line Friday or Open Mic Friday. You call in, talk about anything you like. Ask any question you want, make any comment, drive down any road that you want to go down. I'll go down it with you. To gain access to one of these Friday Q&A shows, you can do that by becoming a patron of the show. Go to patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance, patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance to gain access to one of these Friday Q&A shows. We begin with Matthew in Florida. Welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Okay.
That's you, Matthew. Go ahead.
Sorry, Josh. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep. Sounds good. Go ahead.
Perfect. So I had a couple questions. So I wanted to, I guess we'll get through the first one and see how much time we have. And we can see if we can tackle a few of the others. I guess first, before I ask the question, I'll just mention that last year, Joshua, we spoke. I think we did about 3 hours of consulting calls. And I will just say that the price of the consulting call was worth every bit of it and then some. I think we'll be doing it again here in the future. So I just wanted to say thank you for that and all the content you have provided over the years.
Wonderful. And thank you. Let me just tell people. So if you want to talk to me, the cheapest way to do that is to join me on a Friday Q&A show. But of course, everything we talk about is public. So if you would like to talk with me personally, you can do that at radicalpersonalfinance.com/consult. You can book a personal consulting there at radicalpersonalfinance.com/consult. So that's what Matthew is alluding to. Thank you for the good words. I appreciate it very much. I'll get you a commission. I'll buy you a cold drink next time I see you.
Sounds great. Well, I guess I'll kind of give a recap. Some of these things may kind of jog your memory from the calls, but just maybe for the listeners. We're in Florida. We have some relatives from Spanish-speaking countries that will come into play here in just a bit. The first one actually comes with business training and management, though, is wanted to get your perspective on. We both run dental practices. We had a very close friend of ours move up from about 3 hours away to join us and partner into my wife's practice. And we're just a few years ahead of him on just administrative tasks, task management, organization, running a business. There's just a lot of things that we're a little bit ahead of him on. And I just wanted to see kind of what your thoughts would be on books to read, tips or tricks or resources in regards to really a couple of different areas, organization and task management, stress management, and really just being able to improve your range as it becomes to being a leader and a business owner.
Is this for you or for your employees or your partner?
This is for the partner. So we were kind of up to speed on a fair amount of things, but he's just becoming a business owner, and that learning curve for him has been relatively steep.
I see. Got it. I mean, there's probably so many good things out there. I don't know any titles off the top of my head that are specific to that. I do know how I approach it generally. So let me just lay out a couple of frameworks. First, I think the most important thing is just to be learning to the specific bottleneck at the moment. So in any business, there's always an opportunity and there's always a bottleneck. So we want to kind of think in two different perspectives. Where can we go? And then what's keeping us from getting there? And so what you're describing is basically to me, all right, somebody needs to improve some skills. We need to deal with something specific. What I would say is there's probably, short of a book, there's probably someone who has created something useful as far as a talk or a little mini course or something like that. And of course, there's probably books that are written about it. So here I would go straight to the internet, but I would search specifically for the specific topic. So if it's stress management, then let's try to figure out a plan for stress management and some kind of model for it. I think your big friend here would be ChatGPT. So go to, or Claude or Gemini or whatever, but go to an AI engine and use it, describe the situation in as much detail as possible, and use the AI to give you a set of resources of books to read, coaches to think about, organizations to look at, and specific models. The reason I'm not immediately jumping to books is that while, of course, I believe that it's extremely valuable to go to a book may be an investment of, say, 5 to 10 hours. And it could be that in 5 to 10 minutes of somebody just explaining a simple model to deal with a specific thing, you could have the answer. So look for a model that someone has developed, perhaps, how to deal with stress in such a way that, how to deal with stress in a way that makes certain that, you're not affected by it or I don't know, something like that. And use AI as a way to learn what's out there on your pathway to the actual resources. That's what I would do. And I would focus on learning to the specific bottleneck of where you're at right now. And that's basically a practice of what I'm trying to do more of, which is just-in-time learning rather than just learning for its own sake. I've always been myself a good learner. I'm interested in almost anything, almost everything. And so I always can find something, I can learn about something, I can go from there. But the problem is that you wind up investing many hours into things that you're never really going to use. And if you're not careful, that can lead to inaction. And so sometimes you'll substitute learning about something because it's easier to learn about something and tickle your brain rather than to take action on something. And so over the last few years, I've tried really hard to say, I'm getting older, time is getting shorter. I can't just learn for its own sake. Generally speaking, I need to engage in just-in-time learning. So I need to spend a little bit more time on the analysis of what are my goals, where am I trying to get to, what are my obstacles right now, what's keeping me back either from the higher levels of success or what's causing me problems on the negative side, and then lay out a plan just to learn to that specific topic. And in essence, this is just a business application of inquiry-based learning from the educational context. Is you're formulating a question and then you're learning to that question. And as I see it, this is the most valuable tool to teach your partner to say, listen, you can build this. All of these are skills that can be built. And if you recognize that we've got to build the skill of learning how to deal with stress without it affecting us, that's totally a skill. It's not like you're born with it or not. You're not born as a great businessman or born as a great dental practice manager or born as a great dentist. It's all skills that are acquired. So the process of going from here to there is a matter of skill acquisition. So that would be the specific answer. Now, pulling back from that, speaking broadly, I do believe that it is still important to have a habit, a belief, a practice of just learning generally. Because a lot of times the problem with just-in-time learning is you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you need to actually be learning. So being exposed to concepts broadly is often triggering for you to say, oh, now I see. I had that blind spot. I was totally blind to this direction that I could have gone down. And then you go looking for the specific answer. So here, my recommendation has not changed in more than a decade. It's still the personal MBA. So the personal MBA is a project that was started by a man named Josh Kaufman. I think it was inspired by a Seth Godin blog post 15 years ago. And Godin said, how much, or 20 years ago perhaps, Godin said, I wonder how much more you could get out of your learning if instead of going to a traditional business school for an MBA, you simply went through your own personal version of an MBA. And so Josh Kaufman was a reader of Seth Godin's blog, and he said, hey, I should do that. I think he was working at Procter & Gamble at the time, and he'd been thinking about getting an MBA, and he decided, I'll start working on that. So he started a little blog, and he started putting together doing reviews on business books. He started reading broadly on modern business books. And over the years, he started ranking business books to be basically the best and the best ones of each category. That ultimately developed into a full list, which you can find at personalmba.com, of the 99 best business books, according to Josh Kaufman. And they're spread across different categories. So it includes various aspects of business, various aspects of personal performance, spread out across categories. And he ultimately wrote a capstone book called The Personal MBA, which I think is one of the best, most useful single volume books out there, because he basically goes through each aspect of business and gives a framework or a model for it. So I use a lot of his frameworks in my own thinking and in my coaching. I use a lot of his stuff directly from that book. But the point is that you have this outline of reading list of 99 books. And if a guy who's starting in business prints out that list of reading books and puts it on his bulletin board and says, over the course of the next 4 years, I'm going to read these 100 books, then that's a book every 2 weeks. An average book in this space is probably 6 to 12 hours. So listening at 1x speed, if he's listening on his commute, you can easily do that. Reading them, probably a little faster. So that's a pretty good broad education. And if you pair that up with specifics, like I described in the first part of my answer, I think you'd be off to the races. A guy who goes through that reading list over the course of 3 or 4 years is really going to be well prepared to run any kind of business, broadly speaking, because he's going to be thinking like a businessman, especially if he's also applying the specific skills to the specific situations that he's facing.
Okay, yeah, that's a great framework. I'll definitely check out the personal MBA as well. Do you have time for a few more questions? Or do you have a lot of callers that we need to get to?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I got two other questions. They both relate to children. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. My wife's family is originally from Mexico. And then our business partner, their family is originally from Guatemala. So they're all native Spanish speakers. Their oldest daughter is 9. Again, I mentioned ours are 3 and 1. And so the questions come up with Spanish learning and things like babysitting, really with the goal of trying to get the 9-year-old, maybe not at this age, might be 10 or 12, but getting her earned income and seeing what you felt like would be appropriate things with that age gap if her teaching, because she does speak Spanish, if getting her to learn Spanish and teach it to the younger kids to a certain degree, obviously wouldn't be perfect, but would be a way to potentially get her earned income as a minor. Or at what age would you think babysitting and things like that?
I think it's beautiful. I love that plan. Obviously, she's a little bit young to bear responsibility. And so the concept of babysitting usually implies responsibility. And I think she's too young for that. But if we put her as a playmate and said, here, I will pay you to play with my children. The rule is simply that you have to play in Spanish. I think that is extremely effective. I have done that with my children, and I still think it is one of the most effective things. I read to my children. I do various things, but I don't require output from them. And generally, they're just disinterested and unmotivated to actually give output. And so I have in the past hired a Spanish-speaking babysitter to play with them. And even in that context, it wasn't me hiring someone to care for my children while I was away. It was basically an au pair or a nanny, somebody to play with them during the day when I'm here, but they're just out playing. And so for children, that aspect of playing in another language is extremely valuable. I wouldn't bother at all about whether it's perfect Spanish or not perfect Spanish. That doesn't matter. All that matters is that they're being exposed to the language and that they are forming it in a simple way, because that habit of being comfortable of expressing the language directly is the habit that you're looking for. You can fill in everything else of high levels of ability with lots of listening and reading and grammar at a later point. But for just overcoming that reticence, that hesitancy that people often have, I think hiring a playmate in that way is fantastic. So it'll be hard for the 9-year-old to switch to Spanish, because every human relationship, we wind up having a language of the relationship, and it's hard to go back and forth. But if she's willing to do it and you just simply pay her to play in Spanish with your children, I think that is money well spent.
Okay, great. Last question I have also relates to the children and just family in general, but it's specific to, we wanted to make sure that we had consistent travel back to Mexico. I think the most likely circumstances the girls get older is going to be, in relationship to their summer breaks or whatever it is, as they get to be, 5, 6 and beyond. And so I just wanted to see kind of what your thoughts were or guidelines for making sure we were successful in, traveling to Mexico. I'm guessing they're probably got 4 weeks or so, or depending on how it works with the work schedule. But to be able to get them to go over consistently over the summer so they can strengthen their Spanish skills and other skills, but getting them over there for 4 weeks abroad and making sure they don't get bored. And then also from our perspectives, if that's almost like a mini sabbatical from work, if it's from 4 to 8 weeks, general tips and tricks on kind of getting themes for a mini sabbatical while we're over there. Because although I know some Spanish, I'm definitely not fluent. So it would be they're learning Spanish, but I'm going to be trying to get the most out of it myself as well.
Yeah. So for an adult, I have not found that traveling to be a particularly useful way of learning a language. I find that when I travel, I often wind up using my target language less than when I'm at home. And I'll just give an example, right? I went to France a couple years ago and I planned, I can't remember if it was a month or two there. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I enjoy French. It's going to be really wonderful. So I went to France. I rented a house and I thought, this is going to be wonderful. I'm going to be in the French countryside renting a house. I'm going to be talking in French all the time. Well, as it turns out, while I certainly had the chance to chat with people in French, which is useful, and I'll come back to that in a moment, I made a lot more progress with the French language when I was at home because as a father, I was responsible for all the logistics of the family. And learning the logistics and dealing with the logistics is much more time consuming when you're in a new place rather than when you're at home. When you're at home, you have your routines. If you need to go shopping, you know how to do that. You can probably order everything in. Everyone knows where everything is, so you don't have to care for your children all that much because they're in their room playing with toys or they're in the yard playing with their toys. And so you have more time as a father to actually do things like study a language. When you go to a new place, all of a sudden now, where's the grocery store? I got to go find the grocery store. And what are we going to get? I don't know. What do we have in the Airbnb to cook with? And, what are the children going to do? Are they destroying the place or what? And so you wind up with a lot less time to actually study the language than with a good hour of study at home when everything is calm and you are in your normal flow. So that said, the trip is still really valuable. Why? Because you can enjoy the language. And the point of language is enjoyment. It's not supposed to feel like a chore. It's supposed to be something that you enjoy. So at home, I can enjoy studying, and abroad, I can enjoy using, and I can enjoy the experience that comes from that. I would still stand by what I'm saying, that if you want to actually have Spanish conversation practice, you're better off to hire a coach or a tutor and speak to that coach or tutor for 30 minutes every 3 days or every 2 or 3 days. That's the Spanish practice that will actually build, because you're just going to engage in Spanish conversation. You're going to record those calls. You can analyze them and you can plan the topics that you're going to speak around. Whereas when you are in Mexico with your family, your conversations are generally going to be somewhat haphazard and in various contexts. And even if, let's say, you have a really great language experience, you're in Mexico, all the family comes over and you have this wonderful 2-hour dinner. Well, that's awesome. You're going to enjoy it. You chatted in Spanish for 2 hours. You could have easily done that from home with 2 hours on the phone with a tutor or on a Skype with a tutor. You could have easily done that. So the 2 hours there, again, it's something you should do, but it's not going to be the key meaningful activity for actually building your skill with the language. That's going to be easier for you when you're at home and you have more freedom of time, and then you just enjoy the language, and you will get better with that immersion because of all of the incidental stuff. So what is really phenomenal about traveling is you wind up with the incidentals. You wind up reading the billboards, you wind up reading the magazines, you wind up recognizing all the words that you need that don't come up in your books or in your formal curriculum, of all these little daily day-to-day things of how do I say this and how do I say that. And so I'm not speaking against the travel. It is good, it is valuable, but it's not the magic tool of immersion that a lot of people think it is. You can do immersion physically and you can do virtual immersion, and the virtual immersion is often more effective. Now, with regard to your children, what I would say is this is a really good time for you to look for activities that are going to engage them. So first, in terms of how to actually make sure it happens, we just put it on the calendar and make sure it happens like anything else. If your children have family in Mexico, then you may want them to be there for more time than you yourself can take off. And so you may do something where you take them down, you drop them off, you go home, you work for a while and come back. I've got a client of mine who is Italian, lives in the United States, but every summer he takes his wife and his daughters to Italy, drops them off in the beginning of the summer, spends a week or two there with his family, goes back to the United States, works through the summer, goes back in the fall, picks up his family, and comes back and stays a week or two, picks up his wife and daughters and brings them home with him. And the idea being that he really wants his children to engage with the Italian culture on a deep level. This is their heritage and the language and all of that. So it's going to be a few months there, but of course he doesn't have that much time off. So you may do something similar. What I would suggest, especially if you have children and they're going to go and stay with family members, especially if they're older family members, what you're looking for is activities. So look around and see, is there a gymnastics camp that you can sign the children up for? Is there a horse camp that you can sign the children up for? Is there a particular class or something like that? In Mexico, depending on the area, you should find lots of those amenities. And so that gives your family something to do. And so your parents or your wife's parents can take their grandchildren, drop them off at horse camp, come back and get them each day, and they'll have a great social experience, chance to get along with other people, chance to speak Spanish in that context. They'll learn something, which is useful. Summer camps are a great way of learning skills that aren't covered otherwise. And your parents, your in-laws will get a break so that they can have a break and then enjoy being together in the evening as well. So I would look for something like that.
Okay, no, that all sounds great. I'm assuming on trips like that, again, my girls are too young to be in the school age type of thing. But if they're going to go on a trip like that for a month or two, I'm assuming any additional school learning you just leave for when they get back home. And when they're in Mexico, let them enjoy camps, let them get to know their cousins. And yes, the plan was to go to my wife's hometown, so hopefully some of the logistical things wouldn't be so challenging. But it would mainly just be find activities, make it fun for them, and let them immerse in Spanish.
Yes. But I mean, if you're just giving me a fun toss up of what do I think about giving children breaks, I've experimented with a couple of things. So I'll just share some ideas, and this is not applicable to your very young children, but when you get into school age children, I am not convinced. I really enjoy. My greatest opponents on this will be the French. Okay, the French celebrate every year the rentrée, right? The re-entry. Everyone's coming back to school, and the French believe that it's basically a human right that children must have a break from school, and they treat it very, very seriously in their culture. Children must have a vacation from classes, and so everyone's going to be done. Everyone's going to go away, and then we're going to celebrate the re-entry and coming back to class. And I'm open to that, right? Do I think vacations are good? I do. And I'm not a hard taskmaster. I don't beat my children and say, you have to do work every single day. I think it's useful to have days off. It's useful to have holidays. It's useful to have vacations. So I'm not opposed to that. I have two questions, however, that I question. The first thing I question the usefulness of the North American model, where we do basically a fall semester, spring semester, and then have the whole summer off. And I think, of course, the idea of that is that historically we say that this was related to when students needed farm work and all of that. Maybe so, but I just question it. And if you talk to teachers who have to deal with a classroom full of children, on that schedule, you wind up, at least my memory, and also teachers, but the last week or two of school are practically wasted because everyone's so excited about summer break. And then when you come back, especially with subjects that build, like mathematics, it takes a few weeks to kind of get everyone caught back up, to get their brains turned back on, and get them focused on the actual subject at hand. And so I question if that's an efficient model, if that's something we should be trying to continue. Now, what I do like about summer break, a long extended summer break, is I think that if I reflect on my own experience, I was always ready to go back to school after summer break. I was bored of the summer. I also love how we can use summer breaks to do things that are hard to do at other points in time. I love how, for example, you can get a summer job and you can have 3 months of hard work experience that really builds, but yet then go back to school. So I like some things about it, and I'm open to that. But I question if that's what we really should be setting as a standard, and I don't think that it's a good plan for some subjects. And that goes to the second thing. The second issue I have with it is there are some subjects that really just build every day, and I don't see why we should have this sharp distinction between work versus time off. When I look at myself, okay, I'd go on vacation, but I don't particularly enjoy sitting on a beach doing nothing. I can take it for half a day and then I'm done. That's not interesting to me. Learning is interesting to me. Using my brain is interesting to me. Using my body is interesting to me. And so there should be variation in my schedule, but just doing nothing is uninteresting to me. So I think as parents, we should have a couple of activities that basically we do all the time. And not many, but the one that I've chosen is basically math. And so it's taken some work, but the structure that I'm working under currently is we do math every day, 6 days a week, all year. Now, I take a few holidays off. We took Christmas off. We didn't take New Year's off. Took Thanksgiving Day off, but then get right back to it on Friday and Saturday. And what I see is that consistent effort is something that's important to you. It may be Spanish, it may be piano, but that consistent effort, 6 days a week, just builds amazingly over time. And I did a bunch of calculations on this that I think you might find inspiring. So I calculated at one point, I said, what would it look like if if you were just an average student, and if all you did was take a subject and just do it with high degrees of consistency? So the first calculation that I did was to calculate with math. I picked math, and I said, let's say you do math every day, and you go from the standard model in the school system of 180 days a year to going to 50 weeks of instruction. Let me see if I can remember this. I'm looking to see where I wrote this down in my notes, if I can find it. And the answer is that you basically almost double your output. If you go from 5 days a week for a 36-week school year on a subject like math, 5 days a week for a 36-week school year, and you go from that to 5 days a week over a 50-week year, you basically almost double your performance in terms of knowledge. So I created a performance score when I did it, and my performance score with the first one was 3.5. And then with going from 5 days a week to 50 weeks a year, it increased to 6. It was just a random number that I picked as a plug number. Don't worry about what it means. So you basically almost double your performance by going from 36 weeks a year, 5 days a week, to 50 weeks a year, 5 days a week. And we're not talking child abuse. We're not talking 4 hours a day. We're talking 45 minutes, right? 45 minutes of a consistent activity done consistently over time. Then I said, well, what if you went from 5 days a week, 50 weeks per year, to 6 days a week, 50 weeks per year? And what I did here was I compounded it. And the performance score in that case goes to 8.5. So we go from a standard performance score of 3.5 to a performance score of 8.5 by simply changing the variable of the number of days that we do math. So I look at this and I say, you can be a perfectly average, normal scholar with no unusual ability. And if you are interested in a subject, whether it's mathematics or language or writing or piano or anything, you can insert radical consistency into your schedule and you can dramatically improve the long-term outcomes. That was, by the way, those calculations were over the course of a 12-year school career. And it's astonishing what you can accomplish in terms of outcomes. I also went back and I put it in terms of a number of courses. So now instead of using the performance score that I did, I said, what if we did this with terms of a number of courses? So assume that it takes a scholar 180 days of work to complete a course, right? We'll call in this case a math course. Well, if you're on the standard school schedule in the United States, 36 weeks, 180 days, 5 days a week, you would complete a total of 12 math courses from grade 1 through grade 12 on that schedule. If we could keep the same number of days per year of performance, of 180 days per math course, by doing what I've described, you go from 5 days a week to 6 days a week, and you go from 36 weeks a year to 50 weeks a year. What you wind up with is that same student on the same schedule would wind up completing 20 math courses during that same 12 years. So again, I'm not reflecting increased ability. It's not a bright student, just a normal student. But by putting radical consistency in and doing more days of work, you can dramatically change the outcome. The student would finish 20 different math courses over that career instead of 12. That's astonishing when you look at it. And I think that only tells half the tale. Because what we know, or at least I believe I understand from the research that I've done, is that as you do something a lot, the human body develops the capacity to do more of it better. So a mathematician who does math gets better at doing math because the brain adapts to math. A swimmer who swims gets better at swimming because the body adapts to swimming. Every area that we turn ourselves to in terms of skill development winds up becoming something where we're actually better at doing it. So someone who's done a lot of math is much, much better at math than someone who hasn't done a lot of math. And it's not just the fact that the person knows more math, but rather that the person's brain has adapted to make the person better at learning and doing math. We adapt for the things that we do. So I challenge myself with this question of, say, let's assume that we have, say, 30 to 60 minutes a day, that we would be willing, no questions asked, but we're willing to demand radical consistency of ourselves or of our children, that there are some things we do every day. Where would that time be best exercised? It could be in physical movement. It could be the person that works out every day or runs every day or does something physical every day. It could be in mathematics. It could be in writing. I write every day. It could be in music. It could be in any number of places. But we can take an area and we can apply a radical consistency to it. And since most people are not going to do that, we can get great results. And so actually that's what I think about. So when we travel and whatnot, usually we take time off, and if I'm traveling, we don't do math every day. But basically my rule is we do math 6 days a week, all the weeks of the year, and we take very few days off. And I've seen it in our own education and whatnot. I've seen the results of that. And by the way, I think that's something that anybody could do. You don't have to do homeschooling. You can do that in any way. You just have to choose what is that activity. And I don't believe that in any way violates the rights of the child. I don't live in France, so hopefully I'm not going to be hauled before the French Supreme Court for violating the rights of children. But I think that's something that you can think about. So there may be something for your family that this is so important to us that we do it every day, all through vacations, no matter what.
I was hoping you were going to use the math example, and I had a feeling that you would probably go down that path a little bit. Last follow up that kind of goes along with it is we're not going to do the homeschooling route. We're going to do private schooling. We're starting actually in pre-K 3 for our 3-year-old here soon, and so she can kind of get in on the early stages of kind of getting in. I know they said I think they use Singapore math, I think is the curriculum, but how do you pair maybe private school curriculum with something? I know you've referenced like Life of Fred and things like that in the past, but how do you pair along a second curriculum along with the first one, and how does that work with additional training over summers and that sort of thing too?
Yeah. So first, I would recommend all parents read Susan Wise Bauer's book called Rethinking School. And what I love about that book is it inserts some important questions for any student, for any parent, and any student to think about, so that they're not blindsided by the options that are there for them. So again, the author is Susan Wise Bauer. The book is called Rethinking School: How to Take Charge of Your Child's Education. It is not a homeschooling book. It is a book on how to take charge of your child's education. So the ideas discussed in that book are ideas that all parents will need to consider, regardless of whether they're in a local government school, local private school, homeschooling, anything. And that would be my first recommendation to you. It's a really good book. I wish all parents would read it. I think they would make good decisions and better decisions. Then I think you look at your child and you look at the curriculum of the institution, and then see, well, how's this institution doing? I think that the key benefit of an institution is to really engage in subjects for which a social environment is really useful. So, for example, learning music, learning to sing with other people, learning to paint, learning to do musical theater, learning to do plays. Things like that are really key to the social environment. You cannot do as good of a job in a homeschool setting where you've got two students as you can in a proper institution where you have access to those things. But then on the flip side, there are a whole set of subjects and a whole set of skills that are very poorly developed in an institution. For example, mathematics. Mathematics is inherently an individual activity. It cannot be done effectively in a group setting without some students forging ahead, some students being right at the right pace, and some students falling behind. And if you miss anything in mathematics, you miss any skill or any concept, you are doomed. And that's usually the key thing that dooms a student who says, I'm not good at math, is you go back to fifth grade, and in fifth grade, that student, in second grade or third grade, that student never learned his or her math facts. And because he missed mastery of math facts, is always too slow, because he's never mastered math facts. For then on, math is just like pulling teeth, and it just goes back to math facts. And if math facts had been absolutely mastered, then the student would have been a great math student, but that was missed. Or something was missed in eighth grade pre-algebra, and now that student is swamped and just completely underwater when it comes to trigonometry because he's just fighting. And so something like mathematics is really an individual pursuit. You have to do the math in order for you to be skilled at math. You can't watch people do it. You can't have people tell you how to do it. You have to do it, and you have to do it yourself each and every day. So institutions are bad at math compared to an individual doing math himself. And then there's lots of things, of course, that are in the middle. And so you're not going to use an institution and homeschool. So I think you just want to look and say, what are a few key activities that are really important to our family? And then the institution is going to be for most of it. Most of schooling doesn't really matter, but here's what we think is really important. We really care about Spanish, so we're going to make sure that we're doing Spanish all the time. Or we really care about math. We really care about writing, so I'm going to demand writing from my children every day. You can't do it all, but so you've got to be very discriminating of what you're going to pick, and then just simply make sure that that's happening. Now, in terms of exposure, what I think you definitely will want to do is, first, you'll want to make certain that your children have access to lots of books. The number of books in the home is one of the most reliable predictors of long-term academic success. And so you want to have lots of audiobooks at young age. You want to read aloud lots, and you want to have lots of books in the home. Clearly, of course, your library is a great source. So if all you did was make certain that every Saturday morning would go to the library and your children get 20 or 30 or 40 books, that in and of itself is probably the key factor for long-term academic success, because every book that a child reads increases his or her language ability, increases his or her background knowledge, his or her understanding of the world, helps the child to identify personal interests you follow and watch what is engaging your children, take notes of that, and you're going to get better long-term outcomes. I think also then it comes down to math. And so Life of Fred, I love Life of Fred. I think it's wonderful. I think that if I had to choose one or the other, I would choose Math Academy. I am an unabashed fan now, thanks to listener to the podcast that turned me on to that. But I like to do them both together. So if you could do them both together, great. Get the Life of Fred books and have them in your house. My children read them for fun. And you don't have to require them to do all the work, but then make sure that they're supplementing their schooling with something like Math Academy. But you're going to have to be very discriminating. That's what I would focus on, is lots and lots of books, lots and lots of trips to the library, and supplement probably with a little bit of consistent math practice to make certain that your children are always about a year or so ahead with mathematics. One of the things that I think is so key that I never ever thought about until recently, I've been reading a lot. I read all the articles of Justin Skycak's website. It's at Justin, Justin, the band's name, justinmath.com. He's one of the key programmers behind Math Academy, and he has written a really great free 400-page book on the Math Academy pedagogical outlook. He also, at his personal website, writes essays at justinmath.com, essays on things that he's interested in. And he wrote an essay last year called The Greatest Educational Life Hack, Learning Math Ahead of Time. And he gives the argument. Let me just read a paragraph of it because it's interesting, and then I got to get to the other callers here. But here's the opening of it. The greatest educational life hack, learning math ahead of time. Learning math early guards you against numerous academic risks and opens all kinds of doors to career opportunities. Why learn math ahead of time? Because it guards you against numerous academic risks and opens all kinds of doors to career opportunities. You know how when you take a language class, there's often a couple kids who speak the language at home and think the class is super easy? You can do that with math. When you pre-learn the material in a math course before taking it at school or college, you're basically guaranteed an A in the class. You guard yourself against all sorts of risks, such as the course moving too quickly, brushing over concepts, explaining things poorly, assuming knowledge of important but frequently missing prerequisite material, not offering enough practice opportunities, etc. There are 100 different ways to teach a class poorly, and most classes suffer in at least a handful of those aspects. This is especially helpful at university, when lectures are often unsuitable for a first introduction to a topic. But if you pre-learn the material, you're not depending on the teacher to teach it to you, which means you're immune to even the worst teaching. Opening doors. Of course, the natural objection is, won't you be bored in class? But if you do super well in advanced classes, especially at university, then that opens all kinds of doors to recommendations for internships, research projects with professors, etc. It doesn't matter whether you're doing super well because you're learning in real time or because you pre-learned the material. When you blow a course out of the water while also interacting with the professor, that sets you up for a great recommendation letter, which is vital not just for high schoolers applying to college, but also for college students applying to summer research programs and graduate schools. Plus, it can open the door to working on a research project with a professor, or having them connect you to jobs, internships, and other opportunities with people in their network. Basically, you can use pre-learning to kick off a virtuous cycle. Even if you aren't a genius, you appear to be one in everyone else's eyes, and consequently, you get a ticket to those opportunities reserved for top students. Students who receive and capitalize on these opportunities can launch themselves into some of the most interesting, meaningful, and lucrative careers that are notoriously difficult to break into. Why stop at pre-learning 1 year ahead? Many people think calculus is the end of the road for math, and that it doesn't matter if you get there many years ahead of schedule. But that's far from the truth. There are even more university-level math courses above calculus than there are high school courses below calculus. After a single variable calculus course, like AP Calculus BC, most serious students who study quantitative majors like math, physics, engineering, and economics have to take core engineering math courses, including linear algebra, multivariable calculus, differential equations, and probability and statistics, the advanced calculus-based version, not the simpler algebra-based version like AP Statistics. Beyond those core engineering math courses, different majors include plenty of specialized courses that branch off in various ways. There are so many courses that a student could not fit them all into a standard 4-year undergraduate course load, even if they overloaded their schedule every year. However, the more of these courses a student is able to take, the more academic opportunities and career doors are open to them in the future. Now, he goes on and talks about deals with all of the arguments against learning advanced mathematics for precocious students, things like that. Makes the point about learning higher math, not competition math, which I think is a debatable point, but it's interesting to think about. The article goes on. You can find it at justinmath.com. But the point here is, I think this is the mindset that every highly motivated young man or woman should know about. And this is really the value of summer school. I never in my life ever even thought about pre-studying a class. Didn't ever occur to me. And if someone had come along and suggested it, though, I think I would have been open to it, especially if someone showed me, hey, if you pre-study the material, and you're always a year ahead of your classes, then you really have the opportunity to distinguish yourself. And I think this is actually one of the most efficient ways to learn. That in learning efficiency, just in terms of the least number of hours, if you pre-learn the material on your own, then you just use the classes as basically a review, and then you just go and take the test. And that's completely the opposite of how I did it when I was in school. But knowing what I know now, if I were going through it again, this is what I would do. So I think math is a great example, but on the whole, there's probably other things that we could talk about, and I hope that's interesting and inspirational to you. All right, moving on. We go to the great state of Texas. Welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Yes, Josh, thank you. I remember a couple of years ago, might be up as many as 5 years ago. I think that you said on your podcast that you had either heard an interview or read an interview with Ross Perot, and he talked about how the best times with his family were when he was broke. I relayed that to my family. It went really well. We had some great trips, but I cannot find any. I can't find that. Could you just relay when you might have come across that, or if maybe I misheard it or misunderstood that?
I do affirm that I would have said that, and I could check the archives. I have transcripts, and I could check the archives, but I can't do it live here. And if I did it, I don't think I could put myself on I could cite it. Send me an email. I will look around a little bit and see, but I can clearly cite what he said. And it was basically, he said it's great to be a billionaire. I really love it. But he said it was also great when I was living, I think, on military base housing with my wife. And he said being a billionaire is not that much different from the early experience. That was basically the context of it. But if you've done web searches and things like that, then that's about all I'm going to do is just do some web searches and find it, because this was years ago. So I affirm it was Ross Perot. I remember it. I remember distinctly the quote, but I could not in any way lay my hands on the source of it.
Well, no worries. I appreciate just making sure I wasn't crazy, and I thank you for your time.
My pleasure. And I think it is a common experience, though. And let me just quickly mention, what I think that means. It's not that having more money is not better. I think most people who've been rich and who've been poor would acknowledge that being rich is better. It's not that being a billionaire is not better than being broke. But what I think we do as humans is we are so fixated on accomplishing the goal that we've tried to set that we think that somehow when I get to this goal, everything is just going to be easy and fantastic for me. And that is not the case. Is that every goal that you achieve brings on a new set of problems. And in fact, I just saved this morning to my photo roll a little cute little picture of, it's a mom, it's a bear mom, some mouse mom or something, a nice little piece of art. And she's feeding all of her children, her little mouse children, around a table. And the quote is, "Silly me, here I was hurrying through all the things I once hoped for." And that quote just hit me so hard when I saw it literally this morning, because I thought everything in my life, if I were to go back 20 years ago, everything in my life is a dream. It's everything I have is the stuff that I dreamed about having and that I hoped for having. But I've always suffered from an acute case of the future thinking, of always looking forward to the future and having a hard time slowing down and appreciating the present. And the older I get, the better I'm getting at this, and the more I want to do that and the more I want to spread that, to say that it's worthwhile to work towards worthy goals. But the experience of every stage of life is really worth savoring. And when I think being back to being a broke newlywed, I can understand what Perot is saying, because I'm much wealthier today than I was as a broke newlywed, and yet life was great then, and life is good now. And I'm not a billionaire, but I'm a lot richer than I was back then. And that money, while I'm glad to have it, and I'm grateful for it, it doesn't fundamentally change everything. And so that's the mindset, is we need to cultivate an appreciation of the present while looking forward and working towards the other things that we want to do. And I think also one other comment I would make on this, just speaking generally, we often have this idea, this mindset, that the reason to accomplish something is the reason we accomplish something is so that life will be easy. And the other thing that I saved this morning in my notes, I have a collected file where I save collected wisdom I come across, so I can refer to it. This was a quote from Palantir CTO Shyam Sankar. He was being interviewed, and I read the transcript of what was being shared. And he was asked, "What has been your biggest lesson?" And here's the CTO of big company Palantir. And he says, "It doesn't get easier. You overcome each challenge, and your reward is that you get to be here tomorrow for the next one." And I wrote that down immediately. I said, that is such an enormously powerful concept. I affirm that. That has been my experience. It actually never gets easier. You accomplish something, you overcome a challenge, and then your reward is that now I go on to the next bigger challenge. Now, it's easier in this way. The stuff that was hard 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago is no longer hard. Continuing on our math theme for the day, when you master long division is no longer hard. It was super hard when you were there, but then you master it and you go on. But when you're in algebra, the algebra is hard. And then when you move past algebra, the algebra is no longer hard, but there's always something more. And life is no different. You just press on to the next thing. And so there's never been a point in my life in which I accomplish a goal and all of a sudden now, wow, life is easy. And so what I'm trying to do is change, first of all, I'm changing my mindset. And even with children or me speaking to you right now, I want people to think and recognize that as we learn, we become stronger. And the goal is to become stronger, not so we can do nothing. The goal is to become stronger so that we can do more, so that we can be more effective. I imagine it this way. Perhaps imagine, a guy who's lifting weights, right? An Olympic weightlifter. So every day he's in the gym doing his routine, he's getting stronger. He's not getting stronger with the goal of as soon as I lift, as soon as I squat 500 pounds, then I'm going to stop squatting completely and go and sit on my bottom and do nothing. If you want to go sit on your bottom, you can go sit on your bottom now and do nothing. You're getting stronger so that you are strong so that you can do more. And in life, especially in finance, we often are so focused on, well, I'm becoming a millionaire so that I can retire and do nothing. And that's not the goal. Or I'm going to accomplish this thing and then life is going to be easy. No, people who do that, they just disappear and become relatively irrelevant. You are getting stronger. You are doing hard things so that you can do more hard things and continue on from there. And so this is just a radically more powerful mindset. And this is what I think we should be cultivating. And it goes along with what Ross Perot was sharing. So I just share, silly me, here I was hurrying through all the things I once hoped for. Is that not the case? Here I am today hurrying through all the things that I once dreamed about, trying to get on to the next thing. No, slow down, really engage and be present, and recognize that it never is going to get easier. What I'm doing is I'm overcoming challenges so that I can be stronger for the next challenge. And so the key is to look back and appreciate the progress that I'm making, not look forward and just think, oh, well, it's all going to be fixed at some point in the future. Andrew in Texas, welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Is that me?
That's you, Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay, great. You were on a call the other day with a lady in Bermuda who was talking about taxation at 30% on anything with dividends.
Uh-huh.
Remember that?
Yes. Tell me you're going to fix everything I couldn't tell her then, and I've been meaning to do a whole show on her situation this week and have not been able to get it done. So tell me you're here to save me.
I wanted to speak up during that call.
Excellent. Excellent.
It seemed a little bit obvious to me, but, she was looking for how to invest despite that taxation. And, the thing about growth stocks is that they don't pay dividends for the most part. Maybe a tiny percentage, 1% or something, but they just don't pay dividends. And so her capital gains, I believe, were not going to be taxed. But, and so it seemed pretty clear to me that what she needed to do was invest in growth fund, mutual funds, or ETFs, which have little, if no, dividend payouts.
I agree. Last week I bungled 2 calls and I don't know what there was wool in my brain or something. Did I not do? I knew I did a bad job. I knew I was doing a bad job in the present, but did I not talk through some of the basic options of just, yeah, you're probably right. That was why I was going to go back and do another one. You're right. I mean, just a simple growth stock ETF. It really is the key, or a portfolio of even a portfolio of individual stocks that are chosen to avoid the dividends. I guess probably what I was saying, or what I was trying to say, was that dividends are not your enemy. But I agree with you; it should be a simple thing. What I intended to do, and I may still be able to do, but what I intended to do was just to go and try to find some actual mutual funds that would fit that profile, and look at them through her eyes and see. So I appreciate your pointing it out.
Well, and even to that end, things like, there are S&P, there's an S&P 500 index fund, but then there are versions of that split out the more growth half names versus the more value half names of the 500 companies there. And so I would think if she thought the S&P 500 index fund paid too much in dividends, then the growth version of the S&P 500 would be even more focused and have even lower dividends to be taxed.
Yeah, I agree. It is an interesting situation, and it's one of those things where, I mean, what caught me unaware was I spent a lot of years kind of planning and dreaming about being in her situation, and then I moderated on my views towards tax savings, and I realized that basically every time I've ever made tax savings the key thing, I've always regretted it. And living a tax-free life is not the goal. Living a great life is the goal. And I say the same thing with regard to investments, that having tax-free investments is not the goal. Having the highest total return net of taxes is the goal. And so that should always be the goal. And so I basically, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of just walked away from the whole zero tax thing, even though I had really pursued it hard, because I realized this is not a pathway that really ends where anybody actually wants to end. We should only consider taxes as a secondary factor after all of the primary factors. And to the extent that I hope I said that to her, was to say that focus on the total return and then just deal with the taxes in whatever way. It would be silly to go and choose a fund that doesn't pay dividends if your total return of that fund is lower than using the fund that does pay dividends and just paying the taxes on them. But it should be simple to put together a portfolio of mutual funds or ETFs or individual stocks that are primarily oriented towards growth. And that was what her friend was saying, doing with Berkshire Hathaway stock, the same basic idea. So I appreciate the recommendation. And I wanted to go and look at some individual stocks or individual mutual funds and kind of pick some and look at them through her eyes, because I think it's such a fun thing to think about. It's a situation that very few of us ever get to be in, of living tax-free. And how would you invest if you actually could owe legally zero taxes to any government?
Yeah, and even though she was in Bermuda and couldn't invest through certain channels there, wanting to invest in U.S. equities, I mean, the S&P 500 index is one of the best performing ones out there, and so many other funds struggle to meet or beat the performance of that passive index.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Andrew, for calling in and suggesting it. I knew that my brain wasn't working so well. I'm going to be doing more. So this year, for my own education, I'm actually doing the American College's tax planning certified professional program. So it's been a couple years since I've gotten any more designations, and I feel like a lot of my skills have gotten rusty, and it really bothers me, because sometimes I kind of freak out when I get a question that I can't speak to properly, or this has happened a couple times with a client recently, and so I've just been so involved in other stuff. So this year I'm actually doing the designation with the American College of the Tax Planning Certified Professional Program. So I'm sure that as I go through that coursework, I'll try to bring some more interesting tax shows to the podcast.
Well, don't beat yourself up too much. We get a lot of valuable content from you, and appreciate everything you do.
Thank you, Andrew. You're very kind. We go to Rahul in Washington. Welcome to the show. How can I serve you today? Rahul, you're up. And 2 others just dropped off, so that may be it. Let's make sure he knows. Rahul. Going once. Going twice. and gone. Sorry, guys, that I lingered on. Maybe I lingered too long on some of the early ones, but we'll wrap it up there today. I had a couple of other callers that just right at the end dropped off, so that's okay. No problem. Thank you all so much for listening to today's Friday Q&A show. I remind you in closing that most of my effort right now, the reason there's been a paucity of shows is simply then that I've been focusing on RPF Academy and delivering for my students there. So far, I've gotten some really great feedback from students there at RPF Academy. Several people have shared with me how much they're enjoying it. I think it's an absolute steal of a deal for you guys. I think right now we're at 15 hours of me teaching, something like that, 12 to 15 hours of me teaching, and we're only 4 weeks into it. So there's a huge amount of content there. I was talking with a client of mine yesterday who's a student in the class, and we were doing his initial consulting call, and he led off the call. He says, Joshua, this is an absolute no-brainer. And I tried to make it a no-brainer for you guys because I want to help do transformation this year. I really want to work with you. If you want 2025 to be perhaps the most productive year ever, then I really want to work with you. And it doesn't matter whether you're struggling. I've got a few people in the course who are really struggling. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'm going to be teaching a course or a class on what to do if you're in a financial crisis. So this is going to be for those who are really struggling. And I have some students who are paying a monthly amount so they can afford the tuition to the class. And again, what to do if you're in a crisis, how to work your way through that. And then we've got a lot of people at the really high end. So I'm covering, if you look at the list of topics that I'm covering in RPF Academy, it's pretty significant. If you haven't joined, I would be thrilled if you would do that. Go to rpfacademy.com. Remember that as part of that, you will get 2 consulting calls with me, 2 personal private consulting calls with me. So go to rpfacademy.com, sign up there for the class. There's enough time to get caught up and be with us as we go through live. I'd be thrilled if you would do that. rpfacademy.com. If you'd like to join me next week on the Q&A show, just do that by becoming a patron of the show. Thank you.